The future where the salmon could be nothing more than a name on paper, a story, a distant memory. We need to avoid that.
We, as members of the people of Wales, need to work together to ensure future hand-in-hand or hand-in-scale with salmon.
W's on the identification and characterisation of small salmon populations to support conservation and management is nothing short of alarming. It states that the species is indeed under threat here in Wales. And by the way, the report is very highly detailed, more than I can go into today, but go online and look at it. It is shocking. This report and others look at what is termed the catastrophic decline of salmon and sea trout populations across Wales, and it considers whether and when they may become critically small, and also what is needed to support their conservation and their management. Critically small, by the way, is beyond the levels of sustainable restoration. The report confirms that Atlantic salmon are under threat, not only in Wales, but throughout most of its range. And it suggests that salmon may disappear completely from Welsh rivers within the next few decades. Atlantic salmon stocks on the great majority of rivers in Wales and in England too are currently well below the conservation limits. Egg deposition levels in Welsh rivers were at an historical 20-year low during 2021, with half of the rivers being at just 20% of their conservation limits. IFM, the Institute of Fisheries Management, which represents professional fisheries managers across the UK, has also made it clear that the salmon is in crisis and close to extinction, and they've written to all UK fisheries ministers calling for urgent action. And we shouldn't forget that the Atlantic salmon also has an economic value. It's estimated at around £100 million across the UK and Ireland. So it's therefore also an economic necessity to ensure that species thrives and survives for many years to come. Now, both NRW and IFM have identified causes and factors that play in the salmon crisis. Contributing factors consist of things such as climate change. It's a major factor. High water temperatures and change in flow patterns, including floods and droughts. Physical barriers to migration from and to spawning and rearing habitats. Dams and weirs and culverts and so on. Habitat degradation. This being river excavations, loss of bankside vegetation, siltation of spawning gravels, and the list goes on. So we know what we need to do. A radical plan for salmon, and indeed sewin, is therefore required, and it's absolutely necessary, urgently necessary, for the conservation of these species. This plan must be prioritised and the outcomes measured, but not just at a Welsh level, but at a UK level too, and indeed many of our rivers flow across the borders there. And it also must be implemented at real pace, as time is not on our side. We must understand the methods and the reasons behind population decline, including whether it occurs uniformly or disparately, or through a combination of factors. And many of the experts in the field will say it's river by river, we need to look at it. Some of the studies show that, for example, partial synchrony suggests that salmon and sea trout respond to a blend of shared factors, such as climate-driven influences and local catchment-specific pressures. And furthermore, it's important to grasp the process of population recovery for smaller groups and determine whether recovery is more probable between populations within a meta-population. And this may be influenced by factors such as dispersal patterns, sourcing dynamics, which can impact on reproductive rates. Current research attributes around 40% of the salmon's reduced survival to freshwater impacts. So we must therefore do what we can to prioritise our actions on this element. And we note the interlinkage with other Welsh Government priorities. So, for example, the First Minister's welcome commitment on phosphates and water quality. That will help if it's carried through. And we must recognise the significant impact of agricultural pollution on our salmon and our sewin rivers and the populations. And we need to work with a high level of ambition with our farmers. It's going to be tough to ship, but some of the solutions in this may indeed be at Welsh Government level, such as taking forward with farmers the response to the impact of spreading digestate from anaerobic digesting plants. And river restoration in Wales is currently hindered by the mechanisms under which organisations like Afonydd Cymru and other third sector bodies deliver their actions on the ground. So funding programmes, whilst they're very welcome, are constrained, and it's part of the wider constraints on public budgets and lack of being able to look beyond 1 year. A major source of funding is the strategic allocation funding from Welsh Government, discharged by NRW. It is, however, based on 1 year funding, and Afonydd Cymru have worked hard to advocate this being extended to a multi-year programme. They succeeded in getting it up to 18 months, but this doesn't allow long-term prioritisation of those long-term schemes we need. Now, I noticed that recently the Minister for Climate Change met the Wye and Usk Foundation and Swansea University to see some schemes funded under the Nature Networks Fund. And the Minister, I understand, was very impressed by the visit and seeing the work on the ground. And I'm happy to see that funding has been allocated for projects to help curb the decline of Wales's wildlife and salmon. The Minister said, whilst we must do all we can to protect our precious Atlantic salmon, healthy, free-flowing rivers will benefit all of us, including our physical and mental well-being. She went on to say, a thriving population of salmon indicates a clean and a well-oxygenated river where other species can flourish and where tourism can boom. Whether you're a bather, she said, a toe dipper, a twitcher, an angler or a kayaker, a healthy river means a more enjoyable countryside experience. I agree with her entirely. Those are the words of the Minister. And, I can't declare interest as somebody who fishes, but I am a clean paddler, but not a bather, definitely, not in the cold waters. But it is reassuring to see that the Welsh Government and the Minister sees the bigger picture, that it's a benefit not just for present and future salmon, but for all of us too. But again, Swansea University, who are part of this, need to apply for extensions to that fund to facilitate the work. And the work was also restricted to designated rivers, when actually all our rivers are critical to the restoration of salmon survival. And we must make licensing and consenting processes for the river restoration simpler and faster, so that organisations can deliver within the grant-funded timescales, which are short. So a longer 5-year coordinated delivery programme would be the ultimate in providing a major boost to restoration for salmon. And we also need a water catchment plan for every river in Wales, starting with the fall-in special areas of conservation rivers. That would be a really good start. And this should recognise all impacts from all sectors and everybody working together in one single coordinated plan for recovery. Now, while it's not impossible for salmon populations to recover, it isn't. The history of salmon population shows that they can recover from low population sizes or even from almost eradication once those constraining factors are removed. But the longer these populations remain below their conservation limits, as they are now, it becomes far less likely that they'll recover. And I refer back to a previous point made. The egg deposition levels in Welsh rivers were at a historic 20-year low during 2021. So, however possible recovery is, it is looking ever less likely if things do not change rapidly and without immediate urgent action. It could be as close as 20 to 30 years, some of the analysis shows, before Atlantic salmon disappears entirely from Welsh rivers. We can't let this happen. Monitoring is important. Monitoring the population size and the conservation status of salmon and trout populations. This will need a comprehensive approach. Rod catch data has limitations. It needs to be interpreted very carefully as well. Genetic methods can provide independent assessments of abundance and conservation status. But monitoring should also consider habitat quality, stream connectivity and genetic diversity. In order to conserve fish populations, several important measures need to be taken. It's crucial to restore habitat and to improve environmental quality, to allow that natural breeding and rearing of high-quality smolts, as their size significantly impacts on the later survival. And this restoration should be part of an ongoing effort, regardless of the conservation status of the populations. Maximising the natural connectivity between rivers and removing man-made barriers is essential to allow the adult fish access to spawning habitat and to enable smolt migration to the sea. And protecting the spawning stock from additional sources of mortality beyond natural causes is also necessary. Artificial rearing should only be supported after a thorough investigation of the causes of population decline and the potential outcomes. And gene banking can be considered as a last resort conservation measure, taking into account the factors leading to near extinction and the reality of long-term global climate change. So by implementing these many strategies, we can work towards the preservation and sustainability of our fish populations. Now, I am aware that some angling organisations believe that NRW should reconsider its current policy on stocking juvenile salmon. Now, I believe there are good reasons for this current policy, but we should be planning now for the worst-case scenario and when and whether in that eventuality stocking might be an option. However, the immediate priority has got to be to identify and resolve the many issues already impacting populations of wild salmon, which would also impact stocked fish if this was allowed. So the debate today, I hope, is highlighting the critical situation facing the Atlantic salmon population in Wales and right across the UK. The report from NRW clearly indicates the species is under critical threat. It may disappear entirely from Welsh rivers without action in the next few decades. The IFM has sounded the alarm on the crisis and the fact that salmon is close to extinction. It's clear that we need a radical, urgent plan, one that is not only prioritised, but also measured and monitored at a Welsh and a UK level. And the debate has also highlighted the multiple factors that have contributed to this crisis, including climate change, physical barriers to migration, habitat degradation and agricultural pollution, and other sources of pollution. To address these issues, we need to prioritise the freshwater impacts, particularly noting the interlinkage with other Welsh Government priorities. So in conclusion, it's evident that urgent action is needed to address this crisis facing the Atlantic salmon population in Wales and across the UK. Welsh Government can and should take a leadership role, ensuring this salmon population thrives and survives for years and generations to come here in Wales. And I should also make note, by the way, of the salmon and sewin event that Kevin and I held last year here in the Senedd, which brought some good and constructive conversation, highlighting some of these challenges and ways to resolve the situation. We have another event coming up later this year, which I'd say to members, keep free in your diary. Let us act now, Dipro Llewydd, to ensure that future generations can enjoy the beauty and the history of the king of fish in the rivers of Wales. Gad i ni sicrhau Cymru.
Let us ensure a clean Wales, a prospering Wales for our children and for their children. Thank you very much.
And thank you, Huw, for tabling this very important and timely debate. And salmon do face an uphill battle in more ways than one. The Welsh Government has just announced £11 million to curb wildlife decline, including the Atlantic wild salmon, as you say, and I'm sure we'll hear more about that in the future. I certainly look forward to seeing the improvement to the west and the east Cleddau rivers, the Usk, the Towy and the Teifi, removing physical barriers along those crucial migration routes. The new report that you've mentioned on salmon population commissioned by NRW Wales sets out in stark detail, and you've explained that, why we must act now and why we must act decisively. River health remains paramount, especially when you consider the sea survival rates for salmon are around a fifth of what they were 50 years ago. In other words, our rivers need to support more fish, not fewer. At the moment, as we know, only 40% of our rivers are in good ecological status. That's why, as I said here in the Chamber, you mentioned it now, we must get to those nutrient management targets and we must get those over the line. If we continue to delay the 170 kilograms per hectare nitrogen whole farm limit, we're never going to meet our environmental goals. We've seen the progress that can be made when all sides pull together, with the First Minister's River Pollution Summit at last year's Royal Welsh Show and the recent Phosphorus Summit in Cardiff. We must continue that Team Wales effort, so I would urge members from all sides to support this going forward.
Kevin Campbell.
Thank you very much
for allowing me a minute of his allocated time. And as species champion for the sewin, the sea trout, I would echo the call for a radical, measured plan to protect our freshwater fish stocks. But unlike the salmon, which die once they spawn, sewin typically make repeated migrations between the sea and our rivers, and can surprisingly show a longevity, which actually means they return to spawn as many as 10 times during their lifetime. So although officially listed as a species of least concern, the sustainability of the sewin stocks in Welsh rivers certainly does give cause for concern. And I can speak from my own experience living near the River Tawy and being a keen angler on the River Tawy. I've seen these stocks depleted over recent years. But indeed, from NRW's assessment of 33 main sea trout rivers, 88% of stocks were assessed as at risk or probably at risk, with 12% probably not at risk. So it's clear that many of the remedies already identified by Huw to protect and enhance salmon populations, from tackling climate change to river pollution, addressing the barriers to migration, they will also benefit the sewin as well, which migrate far more often during their lifetime, as I mentioned. So let's do what we can to protect these iconic species so that they're no longer under threat. And I'll work with Huw, certainly as two species champions, to achieve that. Diolch yn fawr.
I call on the Deputy Minister for Climate Change to reply to the debate. Lee Water.
Llawer, it's excellent to hear from two species champions of the sewin and of the salmon to inform this debate. And clearly there's a strong theme in the contributions of all three speakers today about the threat to a number of species, to our habitat and biodiversity in its ecosystem indeed. The Atlantic salmon, as Huw Irranca set out so clearly, is under clear threat, and we are working hard with a range of partners to do what we can. We've already in Wales ended catch-kill fisheries for salmon, introducing catch and release in all of our rivers, and action now needs to go beyond fisheries measures. And in recognition of this, the National Resources Wales, at the request of Leslie Griffiths, developed a salmon and sea trout action plan for Wales, which sets out actions that NRW would take, which were broader than fisheries management, to address the decline in salmon and sewin. And as has been said, we need to consider the multiple benefits of the actions that we deliver. Healthy, free-flowing rivers will be a benefit not just to salmon, but to other species, and to our own species, to our physical and mental well-being, which is why protecting and enhancing our water environment is a priority for this government. And our programme for government commits us to improving water quality by beginning to designate inland waters for recreation and strengthening river water quality monitoring. We've provided almost 9 million for water quality improvements, removing barriers to fish migration and remediating metal mines across Wales, and we've committed to provide 40 million of additional funding between 2022 and 2025 to address water quality problems, including funding for nutrient management boards established to address SAC river catchment challenges. And we've taken steps, of course, to reduce discharges from overflows. This includes making SUDS, sustainable drainage systems, mandatory on almost all new building developments, and this will help relieve pressure on the network by redirecting and slowing down the speed at which surface water enters the sewer system. It will also help ensure storm overflows are only used as a last resort. And we're working to tackle the many reasons for river pollution in Wales, from agricultural pollution, where we've introduced new regulations to help manage nutrients, and also continue to provide financial support for tackling the issue of abandoned mines, where we are at the forefront of developing innovative solutions, and in fact are hosting the International Mine Water Association conference this summer to showcase these solutions. Reducing impacts from storm overflows is a priority, and we need a cross-sectoral approach to this, and we are making progress. So I think we've all agreed the state of salmon stocks shouldn't be viewed in isolation from the wider nature emergency, and we recognise the impact of biodiversity loss and ecosystem collapse. Indeed, my colleague Julie James has led a deep dive exercise into how we can meet our 2030 targets on this. And as part of this, we are funding £7 million this year through a large-scale element of the Nature Networks Fund, with 9 projects Two of them, large-scale projects to restore freshwater biodiversity in the River Irvon catchment in Mid Wales and the River Thaw in South Wales, working with the Lottery and NRW, taking a joined-up approach. As was mentioned by Huw earlier, Julie James recently visited the Reconnecting Salmon Rivers of Wales project that helps redesign barriers to help fish move freely up and downstream, led by Swansea University, and is working to tackle river fragmentation by removing or mitigating the impact of river barriers in 5 rivers, restoring 141 kilometres of fragmented river habitat. So I think we are all agreed on this is a genuine cause for concern. We recognise the interventions needed are cross-cutting and not just focused on the rivers themselves, though we are making important strides there. And if we want Wales to be able to pass on this both cultural and environmental jewel, then we need to act quickly as a team to address these emergencies. Diolch.
I thank the Deputy Minister. Thank you, everyone. And that brings today's proceedings to a close.